After my brother and his wife bought a new house, they had to go out of town and needed their cats fed. Their house and my office are both a good drive from my apartment, but only a few minutes from each other. My brother said if I wanted, I could just stay over in the guest room rather than driving among the three places. So I got the keys and instructions and planned to stay there for 3 nights: Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Monday evening was uneventful until around midnight. I was lying on the living room couch watching Conan, with a cat lying on my chest. I started to drift off to sleep. The next thing I knew, I was standing in pitch black darkness. I completely freaked out. I had no idea where I was. I felt around in the dark and felt nothing. Finally, I realized there actually was a faint blue light coming from above. I moved towards it, and then understood where I was. I was in the fucking basement. The light was coming through the basement door at the top of the stairs, which leads into the kitchen. Just enough moonlight apparently made it through from a window elsewhere in the kitchen. I bolted up the stairs, turned on the kitchen light, and closed the basement door. I was terrified until I calmed myself down enough to come to the conclusion you probably already came to. I had sleepwalked all the way down the stairs after opening the basement door, which I know was closed. A couple of things are important to this story. First, the basement. The house was very nice. Actually, more than they should have been able to afford. The only exception was the basement. I'd only seen the basement once when I'd first got the tour. It was totally unfinished, and was the one major thing they wanted to fix up. All they had down there were boxes and the washer-dryer. I had no reason to want to go down there, and had kind of forgotten it even existed. The other point is that sleepwalking is kind of a thing in my family, almost an inside joke. My brother talked in his sleep constantly, and would sleepwalk sometimes. It always scared the hell out of me. The idea of people doing things in their sleep just creeps me out to the core. Still does. My brother knew this and would tease me about it, so it was known in my family that I had this phobia, but as far as I know, I had never, ever sleepwalked until that night. The image kept playing in my mind over and over of me asleep, getting up from the couch, walking to the kitchen, opening up the basement door, and shuffling down the stairs in total darkness. Creepy as all hell. Anyway, I saw the TV was still on in the living room, playing The Wedding Crashers. I watched the rest of the movie, trying to laugh and think of the sleepwalking as a funny story to tell my brother. When I went upstairs to go to sleep in the guest room, I stayed asleep. That was night 1. The next morning, in the light of day, it didn't seem that scary. I texted my brother about it and joked around. All day, I wasn't bothered one bit, but as I'm walking out of my office to my car, I'm overcome by this sense of dread. All of a sudden, the thought of going to sleep in that house, and maybe sleepwalking again, is scaring the hell out of me. So I had a plan. I stop at the hardware store and pick up one of those rubber door stopper wedges. At the house, I jam this into the crack under the basement door and kick it until it's as far as it can go. I test it out, trying to open the door, and it won't budge. Perfect. Later, I go upstairs and fall asleep. When I wake up, I swear to God I think I'm dreaming. I was standing in darkness again, but this time I know exactly where I am. The smell is the same. The concrete floor under my feet is the same. I look around for the light from upstairs, and it takes me longer to find it because it's farther away. Last night I was only a couple of feet from the stairs. This night it was maybe 10 feet. I run up and turn on the kitchen lights. I see the rubber wedge on the floor, a couple of feet away, as if it was tossed there. Again, I can't stop picturing myself sleepwalking. Out of the bedroom, down the stairs, trying to open the basement door, bending down and yanking out the wedge. And then, again, slowly down into the darkness. I decided I was turning on the basement lights and they were staying on. I opened the door and flipped the switch to the basement stairway. I saw there was a main switch at the bottom of the stairs. To give you a quick sense of the layout, the staircase splits the basement into two parts. To the right is a small area with the washer-dryer, and to the left is the big open area. I walked down and turned on the lights for the whole basement. That's when I noticed something I hadn't when my brother gave me the tour. About 10 to 15 feet away, in the big area, there was a door to what looked like a small closet. This door was closed, but had no doorknob, just an empty hole, so it looked like it would freely swing open. I realized it was very close to where I had just awoken. Then a fucking freaky thought came to me. It was as if each night I was heading to the door and getting a little farther each time before I woke up. As soon as that thought popped into my head, I booked it up the stairs again, left the lights on, and closed the door. I went up to the bedroom, but it took me forever to fall asleep. That was night 2. The next morning, Wednesday morning, I woke up late for work. I didn't think about the basement at all because I was scrambling to get ready. At work though, I was still curious about what was behind the door, so I texted my brother and asked. He replied, "Wait, why were you in the basement?" I realized that when I texted him the day before, I never actually told him where I woke up, so I'd tell him I woke up in the basement, actually twice in a row. After a while, he sends this novel-length text. It was about how the basement is creepy, and not to go down there, etc. How they tried putting the litter boxes in the basement, and the cats made a mess in the house because they refused to go down there. How he volunteers to do every chore other than the laundry, just so he doesn't have to go down there. He says all this stuff, and it's surprising to me, because my brother never believed in the paranormal or superstitions, not even when we were kids. I also realize he never answered my question about the door, but I let it go. After work, I get the same feeling of dread as I'm walking to my car. I really don't want to stay there again, and I decide, fuck it, I don't have to. So I go and feed the cats, get my stuff, and drive back to my place. I'm supposed to feed the cats one more time, so I'll stop over in the morning. As I went to sleep at my apartment, I was thinking of all the steps I'd have to take to sleepwalk to the basement again. Find my car parked around the block, drive asleep to my brother's house, etc. But this time I sleep through the night. That was night 3. Thursday morning, I stop at the house as planned. I'm about to leave when I remember that the basement lights are still on. I don't even hesitate to go down there and turn them off. There was something about being there in the morning that, at the time, made it seem fine. When I go down, again, that door without a doorknob catches my eye, and it doesn't even seem scary anymore. So, what the hell, let's see. I walk over to it, and I distinctly remember not feeling spooked at all. That is, until I reach my hand towards the doorknob hole to pull it open. As soon as I do that, and I mean instantly, I feel this electric feeling, like the air before a storm, and I imagine a hand coming through the hole and grabbing mine. It was like 0 to 60, going from no fear to being certain something horrible would happen if I opened the door. It's hard to describe it other than that electric feeling. I booked it up the stairs and out of the house. So, a month later, I meet my brother for happy hour. A few drinks in, we start joking about me sleepwalking and the creepy basement. I say he never answered me about what was behind the door, and he says I don't want to know, joking at first, but then, as I persist, he gets more serious, insisting that I really don't want to know. Finally, he tells me, and I don't believe him. He's my big brother, and he's only bullshitted me 1,000,000 times in the past. This was his explanation. The previous and first owners of the house had a teen daughter that used the basement as her bedroom. The door was to her closet, where one night she curled up, took some pills, and killed herself. The family was going to remodel the basement, but after tearing it apart, realized they couldn't do it and had to move. That was why only the basement was unfinished, and why my brother was able to afford the place. The seller had to disclose a suicide happened in the residence. He said if I didn't believe him, to look up the market values of the identical houses in his tract. I know how much they paid for their house, and it was way lower. He and his wife considered themselves rational people, and figured it was a bargain, but they still didn't want to tell anyone. After they moved in, his wife was fine with the basement, but he grew to hate it. He apologized for not saying anything to me before I stayed there, but he never thought I'd have any reason to go down there. Now, here's what convinced me. I said, okay, the only thing that makes me kind of believe you is that last morning I was there, and I went over to the closet door. At this point, I see my brother's face change. I continued. When I went over to it, the air felt like, and at that same instant, I say, electricity, and my brother says, electric, at the same exact time. I saw his face and knew he was telling the truth. I've never stepped foot again in that basement, and I haven't sleepwalked since. Number 3. I was at a party at my friend Brian's house. I was really uncomfortable because I didn't really know anyone there, and I knew that all of Brian's friends were really into drugs. I wound up just watching movies and drinking mixed drinks until I fell asleep in a chair. The next morning, I was getting a glass of water and getting ready to leave when one of Brian's friends approached me. He asked me if Brian and I had hooked up during the night because he had heard so much noise coming from his bedroom. I said no, and he continued to tease me about it. He was being creepy and insulting, so I left. Later that morning, I found out that Brian had overdosed and died during the night. His friend had heard Brian moaning and thrashing around and thought that he was having sex. Number 4. So about 3 years ago during summer, I had a habit of staying up late playing games with my window open. This usually wasn't a problem since my neighborhood was quiet. However, one night someone knocked on my window around midnight. When I went over to investigate, I heard someone calling out for help in Spanish. My family was up, and I assumed it was one of our neighbors, so I went outside. Once I saw the person, I immediately knew something was off. Firstly, this wasn't one of my neighbors, and secondly, the person's clothes were ripped and they didn't have shoes on. Turns out the person was a she. I thought it was a young boy at first, and she only spoke Spanish. I tried communicating with my basic Spanish skills to no avail. Eventually, I went inside to ask my parents for help. We ended up calling my uncle, who was fluent in Spanish. He helped translate and told us that she said she was being human trafficked from Honduras and that she needed help. She wanted either $500 or a car to LA. We couldn't give either, and offered to call the police, but she seemed adamant that the police didn't get involved. After this bombshell, my family went inside and decided to just call the police anyway. After making this decision, we wanted to check up on her at least. But as my mum and I were walking outside, we saw a car with no headlights pull onto our street. We immediately noped back inside. Once we felt like the coast was clear, we went back out, and the lady was gone. We called the cops and filed a report, but we never heard anything more. To this day, I don't know if this was some sort of scam, or if the girl really didn't know that the cops would help her, and that she didn't know where else to turn. Number 5. I had a neighbor who was a corrections officer at a juvenile prison in my city. There was a new kid at the prison one day. He was apparently very shy and very quiet. He had the misfortune of sharing a cell with one of the most violent inmates. His second night there, his cellmate unscrewed a screw from a bench and sat on his bed in the middle of the night. When he woke up, he said, "I'm gonna make you a pirate," and shoved the screw into the new kid's eye. My neighbor was the first corrections officer to respond to the kid's calls for help. When asked why he shoved the screw into the kid's eye, he claimed that he looked at him in the wrong way. That's a pretty fucked up situation if you ask me, and not one I'd like to deal with under any circumstances. Number 6. When my brother and I were around 4 or 5, we lived in a house that was about 100 years old. One day, we were walking up the stairs when we saw a tall man in a black coat and a top hat walk into the living room, which was to the left of the bottom of the stairs. A little freaked out, we thought our dad was pranking us, so called out for him. Shit. Both parents came out from the kitchen, on the opposite side of the stairs and isolated from the living room. I hadn't thought about it for a long time, and we never spoke about it. Then, about a month ago, my daughter asked if I believed in ghosts, so I told her this story. Literally seconds later, my phone bleeps. It was my brother saying, "I was just talking to my partner about paranormal shit. Do you remember the guy in the top hat?" Number 7. My friend was visiting family in the States. They lived in a rural community in Maine, and one morning she woke up before everyone else and decided to go for a run. After around 30 minutes, she turned back and started noticing a van following a few blocks behind her. She thought it was strange, so she started turning down a few streets, with the van following every move. She started sprinting, and the van sped up too. She ran to the first house she could find and started banging on the door. No answer. She hopped the fence and started banging on the back door. The dog in the house started barking at her, but still no one answered. She jumped into the empty pool in the backyard and hid while dialing 911. She could hear that the van had parked in front of the house, and a man started calling out to her, offering her a ride home. The dog in the house was now barking like crazy, and the man left after about a minute. Police showed up and took her back to her family's place. She gave a report, and they identified the van from a nearby HVAC business. It had been stolen earlier that day, and the same man was arrested in the next county at a gas station. Number 8. This happened to my father. I'll tell the story the way he told me. I was 22 years old. I had just gotten a place closer to my new job, but the neighborhood I lived in was secluded. Maybe 4 houses within a mile. Nothing for miles after that. I was having a normal night, maybe my first week there. I watched some TV and fell asleep. When I woke up around 1 AM, I was about to go to my bedroom when I remembered to turn off the bathroom light at the opposite end of the house. As I was walking through the living room, I could barely see through to the kitchen, and even farther, the dining room. It was pitch black because the bathroom door was closed. In the dining room, however, I saw something tall standing up in the corner. I froze, and as my eyes adjusted, I saw it was an old man or woman in a white gown with white hair. "Hey!" I yelled. The old person sprinted towards me like a fucking jet. I sprinted back to my room where the light was on. I put my hands up, ready to fight, and the old person came lunging in, and when they saw me, they stopped and said, "Why are you in my house?" I pretended I was leaving, and apologized while I eased into the closer bathroom, locking the door behind me and calling 911 with the house phone. Turns out, a woman about half a mile away in the neighborhood had a form of dementia and wandered into my house while I was sleeping. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Firstly, I want to say a big thank you for everyone who's helped me reach 1 million subscribers. 1 million? Half a million. Fuck. Getting ahead of myself. Maybe one day we'll get that far, we'll see. But either way, that's crazy. Number 1. Please note that I'm a female and not a native English speaker. This is the second time where being multilingual has somehow saved my bacon. I recently drove from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to Buffalo, New York with my cat. The ride was long, but we were making decent time for the most part. She and I had gotten up toward right before you get into New York. It was around 5:30 p.m, but that also meant it was pitch blackout. We had only stopped once to get some McDonald's, and I drank their iced tea quickly to try and stay awake. I definitely had to pee. I didn't want to leave my cat in my car, so I put her leash on and walked into a gas station. The store wasn't empty. There were some dudes around, browsing for honey buns, tasty cake, and cheaper cigarettes than in New York. There was a woman talking to counter guy up front. She was probably like a regular, based on their seeming familiarity with each other. "Do you mind if I use the restroom here?" I said to the guy working there. The man behind the counter said sure, and my cat and I entered the bathroom. She sat on the counter while I did my thing. My cat jumped about a foot when we heard the doorknob rattle. I laughed and said, "Sorry, occupied right now." Now, my cat is a trained animal. She's trained to be around people, stimulating situations, crowds, and relatively loud noises. She absolutely hates cars, though. I looked over at her after the jump, and her tail was as full as could be, and she got low and climbed up to her favorite position on my shoulders. She dug into my hair with her nails, and did a little grumble at me. The same thing she does when she wants to be let outside. The doorknob rattled again, and she swiped in the direction of the door, like a strike. "It's still occupied," I called out, but I wasn't laughing this time. I then heard someone speak. It was a man's voice, and honestly, it kinda made my blood run cold. They were speaking a cousin of my native language. Should I grab her when she comes out? In my native tongue, grab doesn't have multiple connotations like in English. Let me grab them before they go, grab a bite to eat, grabbed by the hair, etc. No, they used what was similar to take. Another voice replied, "No, the cashier's right there. We can go stand outside. I think her car's the blue one." My cat did her angry grumble sound, and I tried to pet her to reassure her. There weren't any windows in this bathroom, and my car was parked unwisely around the side of the lot. I parked it a little away from the lights, because I had a lot of stuff in it and I didn't want the items to be lit. It wasn't the blue car though, So that was one thing in my favor. I heard their steps retreat, and my cat and I sat there for what felt like forever. We both jumped when we heard a knock on the door. "Come out quickly, and my girlfriend'll lead you through the back to your car. They're standing out by the pumps." It was the counter guy, and who I thought was a regular. I opened the door, and she ushered me to the back. Not smart, but I didn't know what else to do. She opened the door, and I could see my car about 20 feet away. I wanted to sprint, but I remembered that I'd used my key fob to set the alarm. I unlocked the car with my keys, and the alarm went off. I still have deep cuts from my cat's panic. I threw myself into the driver's seat and locked the doors. I felt my heart in my throat as I threw the car into reverse and got the fuck out of there. On my way out, I noticed the guy standing by the blue car on the other side of the lot, trying to nonchalantly smoke. They didn't even know I got out. For anyone interested, here's a picture of my cat, a good judge of character. Number 2. I work at my local county animal shelter. Done it for a few years. While you do see a lot of fucked up shit that would probably send you into a fit of rage, you also get to channel that rage into helping lots of awesome critters. It's pretty much what I was meant for. The block is set up like one winding stretch of county buildings. Basically, there's everything on this block, from doctors to the homeless shelter. Needless to say, this block has some interesting characters. No biggie. I live in a pretty shit area, so crazy stuff happens all the time. Last year, right in front of me, someone jumped out of their car and stabbed another person in traffic. Didn't even make the news. Took the cops almost 30 minutes to get there. Back on track. My job lets me bring my dog to work, which is awesome. He just hangs out with me, or gets put into a doggy playgroup with his friends, depending on my day's activity levels. He's super nice to everyone, but can be a little intimidating to some people at first. It's understandable. He's a 95-pound Doberman, and they get a bit of a bad rap. So a few days ago, I was up in the front office on my own, since my coworker was on a break. 2 guys come in. Right off the bat, I'm like, damn, these dudes are high as a kite. Well, whatever. Happens. We're located next to a large college. It's to be expected. Anyway, one of the dudes starts asking about volunteering because he has some community service hours due for some law breaking he did, and I point him in the direction of the coordinator who deals with that. He goes, and the other guy stays and starts making idle conversation. What's my name, my birthday, favorite color. He also compliments my tattoos and asks if I got them all for my birthday. I don't know. This town's weird, so I don't question too much anymore. Then, out of nowhere, he starts telling me how hot I am and asks for my last name. I had to give my first because it's engraved on my shirt, but I lied about my last name. I should have just told him I wasn't comfortable with giving my last name out, but of course I have too nice syndrome, and honestly didn't want to be harassed further by saying no, which I have in the past. So the other guy comes back. They leave, and I take my break. Lo and behold, not 10 minutes into my break, I get a text from my coworker that the other guys came back looking for me, and not to come back into work. They apparently leave 20 minutes later. Phew, in the clear. So fast forward. Day's pretty much done, just closing up shop. A different coworker to the one I work up front with comes over and sees that I'm hurrying to leave. He asks me if I want him to take my dog out to a yard we have, let him do his business. I appreciate it and agree. My coworker also says he'll put my dog in my car too, since it's parked next to his, and he doesn't mind. He has the night shift to watch the animals, so he's got some time to chill. He's also my homie and knows my routine. I say sure, since I have a few binders to take out anyway, and I hand him my keys. He goes off with my dog and brings my keys back about 15 minutes later. Besides that guy, I'm the last to leave for the night. It's about 8 and already dark here, and the parking lot we have is so small that employees have to find street parking. That's a whole other level of shit. As I'm about halfway to my car, probably a 5-minute walk away, I can hear some low talking and footsteps coming behind me. It doesn't ring any alarm bells at first. Lots of buildings and stuff on this street, and some homeless people mill about later at night, but they're pretty harmless, so I just keep on trucking. Not that many steps later, I hear the steps behind me speed up, and feel a hand touch my shoulder. The hand stopped me so abruptly, I end up dropping my binders with loose papers I just organized. I turn and freeze when I see it's the 2 guys from earlier. "Did you need something?" I ask, as a sinking feeling set in. "I just wanted to know why you lied to my brother here about your name. You like one of those stuck-up bitches who thinks they're too good?" asked the guy who wanted to volunteer. I stood there with my mouth like a fucking flytrap, no idea how he knew I lied. The other guy answered that for me. He told me he found me on Facebook from searching my work. I came up with the smoothest lie I could, and said that I'm not allowed to give my full name to customers for county law safety regulations. That's total bullshit, but they looked like they believed it. While I'm saying all of this, I see his hand resting on his pocket, and I subtly take in that they both have decent-sized pocket knives halfway concealed. I carry one myself for work, in case an animal ever gets caught on a leash or something, but I'm a 21-year-old girl. I'm 5'2" and 100 pounds. I'm not gonna be able to do shit to these guys if it comes to it. I know that much. So now, I'm wanting to fucking cry, while the volunteer guy's going on about how it's good I'm not stuck up, because they don't like stuck-up bitches, and think they should all be taught a lesson in mannerisms. I'm trying to think how to get the fuck out. No one's around, and I don't want to use my phone to call 911 in front of them. I'm almost to my car, so I don't want to risk going back to work. The guy who's got the hots for me is staring at me like a damn Christmas ham, so I want to puke. Then, they tell me about this party they're going to, and that I should come since I'm a good girl, and good girls go to parties with them. The way volunteer guy said it made it like an order and not a request, and the hairs on the back of my neck went up. I get an idea while he's talking, and just pray to the Almighty it's going to fucking work. I force a relaxed smile and agree, saying I just have to put my binders in my car or my boss will kill me. They look stoked at my agreement, and proceeded to follow me to my car. It's too dark to see inside the windows, and streetlights are a rare thing on this side of town. I get to the back door of my car, open it, and I smile when I see my dog's head pop up from the trunk out of his slumber. Before I even make a sound, his ears go back and he starts growling. I hear a "what the fuck is that?" come from behind me, and that's all it took for my dog to get his ass up and lunge at them, doing his best to get his large body between me and the door. I grab his collar and let him jump out of the car. Let me tell you, he's going nuts. He's got drool flying out of his mouth, and he's snapping and barking and growling something scary. The guys back up, start telling me that we can't bring a dog to the party, and to put the fucking deranged mutt back in the car. I hold back from rolling my eyes and apologize, saying I'm just gonna give him some dog food that I keep in my glove box. I shut the back door and open the front. My dog won't get in, just keeps growling and snapping at the 2 guys. So I keep a hold of his collar, and I get in the driver's side first, then call him in. Thankfully, he reluctantly follows. I shut it as soon as his arse is on the passenger seat, hit the locked doors button, and turn on my car. As soon as I do that, they know I'm not about to go to some party with their dumbasses, and start to bang on my window. My dog goes into rage mode, and hops in the back, and starts going ballistic, while I peel the fuck out of there, really not caring if I hit one of them or not. Once I'm down the street a bit, I see them in my rearview mirror, just staring at my car, I took the opposite direction in which I normally go home, just to make myself feel better, even though I have an hour commute home. As soon as I get back, I deactivate my Facebook. I told my boss the next day over the phone, and they're working on transferring me to one of our other 2 shelters in the county. So, if those 2 creepy drug guys are listening, I just want you to know that my dog goes everywhere with me, and I'm sure he'd love a second chance at you. For anyone interested in pictures of him, he's the one on the right of this picture. The other is a buddy of his. His name is Zeus, aka Zeus the Moose or Zeusy Moosey. Number 3. So this happened in early July, and it still creeps me out a bit today. I'm a soldier, and I live in the barracks on base, since I'm not married, and can't really afford my own place. For security reasons, I won't name the base or its location. It's typically pretty quiet around here, aside from the common parties that happen on the weekends, so this event was pretty surprising to me. Additionally, I work the night shift 4 days a week from 2 to midnight, so it's even quieter on most days when I return to my room. This night, however, was on 4th of July weekend. Military gets a 4-day weekend on federal holidays, so the common area was a bit louder on Thursday night, my last workday for the week. To give you a better idea about the layout, the barracks are separated into 4 3-story buildings that all share a large, concrete common area. Since we obviously can't smoke in our rooms, the common areas have 2 smoking zones on either side. We call them the smoke pits. The pits each consist of a picnic table, a grill, and a large trash bin, covered by an awning to block out the rain. The pits are the site of most of the parties that occur on the weekends, mainly the one furthest from my building. I'd gotten out of work early, so it was about 10 when I got back to the barracks and made my way to my room. As per usual on nights that don't have workdays following them, there was a party at the pit furthest from my building where most of the people outside were at. However, there was one person at my building's pit. Originally, I assumed he was just out there for a smoke and wasn't up for partying. What was strange, however, was that he didn't have a cigarette. He had no vape and wasn't on his phone. He just sat there, dressed in blue jeans and a red hoodie with his hood up. It was the middle of July in the south, so this was a bit strange. But the rooms are pretty much perpetually cold during the summer. We don't control the AC, and the barracks NCOs just blast that shit on high. It's at like 65 degrees for the entire summer for whatever reason, so I figure he might just have stepped out to warm up. He sat on the table with his arms in his front pocket and his head hanging. Wanting to smoke, I stood at the opposite side of the table and lit a cigarette. The guy didn't speak or even move for the entire time I was there. He just sat there, blankly staring into his lap. I didn't think much of it and just made my way back to my room. I changed and patrolled YouTube for a while. It's important to note a few things here. Each room houses 2 soldiers, and the doors automatically lock when closed. The only people with the key are the unit headquarters, and of course the room's residents themselves. In the event that a resident loses their key, they have to call to get someone to unlock it every time they need to get into their room. That is, until the key is replaced. Additionally, my room is located on the 2nd floor of the building and is a bit tucked away around the back. So, unlike the rest of the building, there's next to no traffic outside of my room. My side of the room also has the only window and is right where the door is, so I can hear when someone rarely passes my room. My roommate worked an odd shift from 8 PM to 4 AM, and I wasn't too sure what days he worked. Finally, the room is very dark, and I can't see if my roommate is asleep in the room when I enter, so I close the door quietly by keeping the knob turned as it closes. He wasn't home at this time. At around 2 AM, I hunkered down to get some sleep. Before I dozed off, however, I could hear a shuffling outside. I peeked out of the window and could see some obviously inebriated girl tripping over herself to get to her room. I knew the girl lived in the room next to mine, so I didn't see a need to help her since she was literally right there. But I listened for a while until I heard her enter her room. About 10 minutes later, I heard someone walking towards my door, and then stop. I figured it was my roommate getting home, but I couldn't hear the obvious sound of someone unlocking the door. For a long moment, it was silent. Then, I heard the sound of my door slowly opening. Instantly, I sat up and looked at the foot of my bed where the door was. There was no sound of the doorknob turning, and no click of the lock. The door was just slowly being pushed open, as if someone was trying to enter very quietly, which wasn't like my roommate. Once the door was fully open, someone, not in uniform, walked in. At first, I didn't recognize who it was, until I noticed the red hoodie. I gasped and screamed, "Get the fuck out!" The man jumped and darted out of the room. I jumped out of bed and ran to the door, but by the time I made it, the guy had jumped over the rail and onto the bushes below, and was running across the common area. Immediately, I called the MPs, and they arrived within minutes. A few of them did a search of the area, while the rest made trips around the rooms to check on everyone. The girl's room next to mine was also not closed. They eventually found the guy in a storage room of one of the other barracks buildings. It was a few weeks before I found out the whole story. Apparently, the guy wasn't even a soldier, but was an ex of the girl who lived next to me. Prior to that night, the ex didn't know what room she lived in, and had attempted to follow her to her room after she was finished partying. He knew she didn't have a roommate at the time, so he figured he'd be able to prey on her without anyone noticing. I don't know how the guy got onto base, since there's always an ID check at the gate, and the guy didn't have identification on him. Fortunately for the girl, in my attempt to be quiet, I'd accidentally not closed my door completely, and the guy mistook my room for hers. What's worse is that the girl hadn't closed her door all the way either, so had the guy not mixed up the rooms, he'd have broken into hers while she was extremely drunk and likely unconscious. While I'm fortunate that the girl was safe, I fear for what might have happened if I'd been asleep when that creep was in my room. Typically, the barracks are supposed to be a safe place for troops to sleep, and things of this nature don't usually happen. But this goes to show that you need to be careful, no matter where you are. Number 4. This happened just last night, and honestly, I'm a little shaken up over it. I'll try to retell the tale exactly as it happened, but my fear is sure to have fudged my memory a bit. I work evenings as a dispatcher in a medium-sized Midwestern city. I was driving home at 2 AM when I stopped for gas. In retrospect, it was stupid to have stopped at all. The gas station was poorly lit and completely empty of other customers, but I knew the shady areas of town, and this wasn't usually one of them. As I was pumping gas, I noticed a middle-aged black woman sitting on the curb across the parking lot. It was a cold night, and it just started raining. The woman wasn't wearing weather-appropriate clothing, so she was drenched. When the woman saw that I was watching her, she called out to me from across the lot. My second of many stupid decisions that night was choosing to engage with her. I was worried for her, so I approached her to see what kind of help I could offer. "Hi, beautiful. I'm just trying to get home, but no one will help me," she said. "I'm trying to get to City A, but the cab ride is $60 and I only have 40. Can you help me?" I don't usually give money to panhandlers, but this woman seemed genuine. The weather was terrible, and my job centers around helping people, so I agreed. I had told her I didn't have any cash on me, but if she would come with me inside, I'd take some money out of the ATM and give her a few bucks. Inside, the ATM wasn't working. I apologized and told her there was nothing else I could do for her. She followed me back outside, idly chatting with me as I opened my driver's side door to get in. And then she got in the car. I was too shocked to really say anything. I sat, staring at her as she buckled herself into my passenger seat. As soon as she got into my car, her demeanor changed entirely. She no longer seemed forlorn as much as she did extremely excited, restless. "Just take me to my aunt's house," she said. "She can give me money." Of course, alarm bells start going off in my head. Although my first instinct is to tell her to get the fuck out of my car, my gut tells me that that would be dangerous. She had already proved to be unpredictable. She seemed to be high, and I didn't know if she had a weapon on her. Forcing her out of my vehicle, I thought, had the potential to elicit a violent reaction. "Where are you asking me to take you?" I finally said. "Just start driving, and I'll tell you where to turn." "No. If you want me to consider driving you somewhere, I need you to tell me where we're going." I say this with no real intention of driving her anywhere. "Don't worry, honey. I'm not one of those bad blacks. I'm not gonna rob you or nothing. Just drive." "No," I repeated. "What's your aunt's address?" "Okay, it's on Street A." "What's the house number?" As I was asking her questions, she got really agitated. We still hadn't left the gas station parking lot. I considered getting out of my car and going into the gas station for help, but A, she seemed to know and be friendly with one of the attendants inside, and B, I wasn't about to leave her alone in my car. Finally, she snapped at me and said, "Why are you asking so many questions? I thought we were friends. You don't trust me? Is it because I'm black?" "I work at a police department," I said. "It's my job to ask these sort of questions." She flipped the fuck out. Started yelling at me about being a snitch, about trying to get her into trouble, just in general losing her damn mind. At this point, I'm more scared than ever. I just wanted her gone, but my instinct still told me asking her to get out of the car wouldn't work. So, I decided to take a risk. I'm not a police officer. I just work at a police department. Why don't I drive you to Walmart and see if they have an ATM there that works? My idea was to get her out of my car as peacefully as possible and then lose her in the store. She liked my idea and immediately calmed down. I knew that driving off with this woman in my car was incredibly risky, but it seemed like my best option at the time. As we're driving, she keeps talking to me. Her thoughts were erratic, bouncing all over the place. It sometimes seemed difficult for her to follow through with one thought, but this is roughly how our conversation went. "I'm glad we're friends now. I have about 5 or 6 people trying to get me. I'm going to come over to your work tomorrow so we can go and arrest them together." "Okay, we can talk about that tomorrow. Tonight you said you're trying to get home." "Yeah, honey. I'm trying to get to City B." "City B? I thought you said you wanted to go to City A." Yeah. City A. That's what I meant. That's why the cab ride is $40. It's far away." "The cab ride is $40? You said you have $40. "I do, baby. I have $40, but the cab ride is $60. Silence. "Are you sure you can't take me to my aunt's house? She lives close by on Street B." "I thought you said she lived on Street A." "No, baby, I meant Street B. But it don't matter, cause she won't give me money anyway. You sure you can't just take me to City A?" It was terrifyingly obvious that this woman was utterly full of shit, because the details of her story were constantly changing. When we pulled into the Walmart parking lot, she finally got out of my car, but only after I got out first. She then followed me into the store. I told her before we went to find the ATM that I needed to use the restroom. My plan was to call the police from inside the store, but she followed me into the bathroom too, And that's when things got really weird. She grabbed me by the crook of my arm and whispered in my ear, "If you don't got no money, that's okay. But let me ask you something, sweetie. Do you like getting your pussy ate?" I told her no as forcefully as I could manage, bolted into a stall, and locked the door as fast as I possibly could manage. As soon as I had a barrier between us, I said, "You know, I have some friends at the police department that can probably help you better than I can. I'm just gonna give them a call and we can figure this out together." Again, at the mention of the cops, she started screaming at me. I just kept reiterating that the police would help her. She snapped at me that she was going to leave and stormed out of the bathroom. But it wasn't over. I waited to make sure she was really gone. Sure enough, not 60 seconds after she left, she came back into the bathroom and started banging on the stall door. Then she said something that scared me more than anything else. "Hey, come back to your car with me. I left my beer in your car." I blatantly tell her that no, I saw her get into my car and that she had absolutely nothing with her, only the clothes on her back. After that, she left the bathroom again and didn't come back. I waited a good 5 minutes before exiting the bathroom. I immediately found a manager who called the police for me. Thankfully, I was in a different police jurisdiction from the one I work in, because I would have been mortified at how entirely stupid I had been the whole night, and would have died of embarrassment if any of my co-workers responded. The officer that did respond took my statement and advised me to be more careful in the future. He said that sometimes panhandlers turn violent, and that just recently, there had been a report of a woman who matched her description, who assaulted a good Samaritan that had stopped to try and help her. I definitely learned a lesson on stranger danger, and I'm lucky to have come out unscathed. I'm glad my stupidity didn't kill me. So guys, the next time you try and help a stranger late at night, don't. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. I was 10 years old when this happened. I live in quite a big house, which my parents had bought together back in the early 90s. It was great. The neighborhood was great and the people were amazing. My parents didn't think that anything could go wrong. I was always quite restless when I was young. I could never sleep, and would just lay in bed for hours and hours staring at the ceiling with strong hopes that I could finally fall asleep. Insomnia at a young age isn't very fun to deal with. Anyway, one particular night I sat up from my bed after laying there for a few hours and reached for a glass of water that was on my nightstand. I shared a room with my sister, who was less than 6 months old at the time. She didn't like to sleep alone, so I offered to share a room with her in hopes that it would help my parents. When I looked over to her crib, I saw a large shadow leaning over her. Its back was to me, and it seemed like quite a big man. "Dad?" I called out, wondering why he was awake when he had work early in the morning. The shadow turned around, and I didn't get a chance to see any details, seeing as the only light source in my room was a dim nightlight. He walked away without a word, and I remember shrugging it off and laying back down again. This went on for a few nights. A man, who I assumed was my father, came in and looked over my sister's crib, even going so far as to pick her up if she cried, and then walked out quietly once he noticed I was awake. One night, I remember finally being able to fall asleep and feeling rough hands against my cheek as I managed to do so. I was too tired to open my eyes, but I really wish I had. My mum picked me up from school one day, and our usual routine was to go to the store and get some stuff for dinner, and then go straight home. That day though, my mum was a bit sick and wanted to just go back home. When she opened the door, at the top of the stairs was a large man. He had a bag of bread with him, and a pair of my mum's underwear. My mum, who was carrying my baby sister in her car seat, immediately froze. I didn't know what to do either. Without any warning, my mum yelled, "Who the fuck are you?" The man stopped walking and turned to notice us. He gave us a toothy grin and stared at us. I felt fear travel up and down my back. My mum told me to never talk to strangers. She never told me what to do if one was in the house. The man had a gun in his pocket, and when my mum noticed this, she let out a loud scream. She handed me my sister's car seat and pushed us behind her, pushing us outside the door. I heard the door slam, and I began to cry uncontrollably. I knew what guns did, and how intruders used them, so I rushed while holding my sister to my neighbor's house across the street, and banged on the door as hard as I could. My sister started crying along with me, and after what seemed like forever, my neighbor opened the door. "What's wrong?" she yelled when she noticed the two of us. I didn't know how to explain what was going on. I just knew that there was a bad man in our home, and my mum was in there with him. 911 was all I managed to get out, to which my neighbor grabbed her phone and dialed. After I had calmed down enough, I talked with the dispatcher, and we had police heading our way. I can't remember exactly how I explained it to the lady on the phone. I just remember vividly saying that my mum was in trouble. It was our luck that we lived right next to the police station, and they showed up in no time. My mum opened the door when she heard the sirens, and looked ghostly white. I didn't know why, until a couple of years later, my mum told me that the man had gotten away. He escaped through the back door after pointing a gun at my mum's head. He heard the sirens too and bolted. The police did a thorough search of our home, including our attic, which we never used. They found tons of empty bread bags, chips, peanut butter, and a lot of candy. A couple of pairs of my mum's underwear were found as well, sticky. A few blankets were found in the corner, and they dusted for fingerprints. 4 years later, during my freshman year of high school, something else happened. My school is quite a ways from my house, and it takes about 30 minutes to walk home. With a shortcut through a field with a lot of trees, it only takes me about 20. I walked the shortcut alone because I'm the only one in my group of friends who lives in this particular area. A couple minutes into the walk, I felt chills up and down my back again, so I turned around and met eyes with someone I thought I would never see again. It was him. I didn't know what to do, so I just started running and screaming for help. Nobody else was in the field, so I ran as fast as I could to the fence that led into my neighborhood. It's a large fence, so I tossed my bag over while still screaming, and tried to climb it, but felt his hands grab the back of my jeans and throw me off the fence. "You're as beautiful as your mother," he said deeply, giving me the same toothy grin he did 4 years before. I continued to scream for help, but his hand covered my mouth. I heard more footsteps rushing towards us, and I prayed it wasn't his friends coming to help him. To my surprise, one of the school's football players rushed and tackled the man. His fist went flying into the man's face, and I cringed as I heard the crack of the man's nose. He didn't bother fighting back, so I took out my phone and called 911. This time, they got him. 2 years worth of therapy sessions, and I'm finally okay to talk about it. Any time I think back to either of those incidents, I think of how it could have easily been avoided, if only we had checked the attic. I was working for a condo building, letting air conditioning guys look at units within condos. I was just a key holder. One of the last units of the day was a condo. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I opened the door, and immediately a waft of foul smell hit me. Just some rotten eggs, right? I enter the unit with the air conditioning guys, and see some mouldy looking bread on the counter, and due to condensation, a sweaty looking cake on the stove. It's pretty fucking rank in here, I say to the guys. I look into the bedroom and see an older black woman with kind of a bad blonde hair dye job, hunched over in bed in a bit of a yoga pose. Sort of sat up, but head at feet, legs crossed. I'm immediately embarrassed. Whoa, sorry ma'am, I didn't know you were home. No movement. I take a step closer. Ma'am? She's fucking dead, dude, one of the air conditioning guys says, as he hurries out of the unit. His only evidence is the smell, and my tone of voice when I said ma'am. I step a little closer. The woman's skin is bruised, and has mouldy patches on it. This is not a yoga pose. This is a settling into bed pose. I later learned from the police that she was a young Caucasian blonde woman, not an older black woman. Last diary entry was 10 days prior. Pill bottles and a last will and testament were on the bedside cabinet. I can no longer eat wonton soup, which was the first thing I tried to eat 8 hours later. On top of that, I can no longer handle the smell of a dirty fridge, such as mouldy items left by careless co-workers. I also no longer fantasize about how cool the zombie apocalypse would be. The smell alone. This is one of my not-so-wholesome adventures from the ghetto. It deals with attempted kidnapping and trafficking, or possibly even murder. Who the fuck knows? Not me, I'm still here. As can be inferred from the word ghetto, my neighborhood was pretty horrible crime rate-wise, with a strong divide between ethnic groups. I lived in Israel at the time, and seeing as I'm Russian, my friends were also Russian, and what friends they were. Ron, Andre, and Eli were my best friends in 5th grade. We were the coolest 10-year-olds ever. So cool that we had our own Zula. Zula is a Hebrew slang word describing a private place, usually built by you, where you and your buddies can come to chill and hang out. I guess the American equivalent to a Zula would be a treehouse. Ron, Andre, Eli, and I found the perfect place to settle down and claim as our own. The ruins of a roof of an old bunker next to a tree in the middle of a field on a hill. It was positioned on somewhat of a steep hill, and it looked like a concrete bunker in a sea of tall, yellow grass field. We travelled the neighbourhood in search of discarded items and furniture to bring back to our little Zula, and came back with a magnificent cum-stained couch, a rug, and old-school posters of naked ladies. Our Zula was officially complete, the most wholesome one in town. Andre hung his naked ladies on our tree, and was very proud of his work. Andre, Ron, and Eli had a tradition. They'd skip school every Wednesday to hang out at the Zula. So, naturally, I'd start skipping Wednesdays as well to join them. And for a while, it was great. We'd play cards, discuss 5th grade politics, and prank call our neighbours. Until one day, Andre just had to do a stupid. You see, when little horny Andre picked up those naked damsels from the street, he also picked up a business card, an escort service card. One Wednesday morning, Andre decided we just had to prank the poor hooker. Eli, whose role was to be the clique's official dumbass, instantly agreed it was a good idea. Ron and I, however, were a bit more skeptical of Andre's seemingly harmless ruse. But you know how well peer pressure works on 10-year-olds. Andre calls the number and puts it on speaker. It rang and rang until someone answered. A man who I can only imagine was the girl's pimp. The man told Andre he sounded like a big boy in an incredibly creepy way. And mind you, Andre did have somewhat of a deep voice in comparison to normal 10-year-olds. So, when Andre, the beautiful idiot, decided to pretend to buy a hooker, the guy on the phone had no objections. Andre proceeded to give him the closest fucking address to our Zula, and an exact description of how it looks. As soon as the call ended, Ron flipped out at Andre and left. Eli and Andre were super pleased with their prank, and I just sat there on the cum-stained sofa, wondering what the fuck we just did, and is that hooker seriously going to arrive? Andre and Eli were sure that the man got their joke. He didn't. 10, 20, 30 minutes pass, and nothing, no hookers to be seen. We all laugh about our biggest achievement yet, and completely forget about the "what a big voice you have" man. I think it was an hour later, we saw a black van pull over the street next to our Zula's field, the address which Andre gave. Andre and Eli ignore my concerns regarding the inconspicuous van, and so I'm the only one watching it. It went up and down the street, as if it was trying to see if there's any way for it to drive into the field. Impossible, since it's kind of locked between 2 apartment complexes and a cliff. It then pulls over again at the original spot. At this point, you'd expect a woman to come out. But no. Oh no. 2 men get out of the van and start walking up the hill towards our field, towards us. I could feel myself screaming internally as I motioned my buddies to look. We all sort of freeze and have a little, "oh my god, what have we done" moment. One of the men yells, "Big boy, I need to ask you something." We practically leave a cloud of dust getting the fuck out of there. We ran up the grassy hill, which gets quite steep as you approach the peak, when Eli falls and scabs his knee. We didn't notice him falling because he didn't make a sound, and by the time we saw him, we were too far, and even more terrified as the men were approaching him and us fast. So we left him there, like the cowardly 10-year-olds we were, and just kept running. We reached another bunker area in the upper street. It is Israel. Bunkers and shelters are everywhere. We hid in one of those 4 concrete shelter buildings, designed like big old boxes. We gently closed the metal door, sat in the farthest, darkest corner, and waited. We could hear the men searching the other shelters, and at this point, we're pretty sure we're going to be found. The moment came, and the men opened our shelter's door. I remember his voice to this day. Cold, eerie, disturbing. "We just want to talk. We came all this way for you." We screamed our lungs out, and by sheer chance, a couple who were walking by with their dogs came to the area to investigate our cries. They scared away the men with threats of the police and their massive German shepherds. We were so fucking relieved. But then we remembered Eli. We quietly creeped down the road towards Arzula, but didn't see Eli anywhere. Andre was the only one of us who owned a cell phone, so calling him was impossible. We thought maybe he had managed to run back home, and so that was our next destination. I remember we looked around carefully for the van. It wasn't parked in our vicinity anymore, so we walked down to that street, on a route which connects to my street, and eventually to Eli's. We managed to get to my street, and at this point we were sure the van and the men were gone. We were wrong. They had circled the neighborhood. We saw them coming back behind us. We freaked out and ran up a long case of stairs. The van almost hit us and the stairs, breaking with a screeching tires sound, and one of the men jumped out of it and started galloping up the stairs, chasing us like a crazed baboon, yelling disturbing things at Andre. "You have such a pretty ass. It's gonna be mine." That was the least disturbing comment of them all. We weren't fast enough to outrun the man, and in the middle of the staircase, just as we were about to break left into a rocky terrain, he grabbed Andre. Andre was screaming hard now. I had never heard him scream like this. I was in tears. Then, in a moment of accidental courage, I picked up a rock and ran down towards the van. The man was so fucking close to shoving Andre in the back of that van when I proceeded to snipe his head with my trusty rock. It had at least made him let go of Andre, miraculously turning him into Speedy fucking Gonzales as he started to run away, still screaming his very soul out. I, on the other hand, was pretty much fucked. The man was so incredibly pissed. I never saw someone that angry in my life. I tried running away, but at this point it was futile. The man grabbed me by my hair and started dragging me towards the van. In what felt like hours being dragged to the van, I saw my older brothers running towards me with a metal pipe. They pried me out of the man's hands and proceeded to beat the living shit out of them. They were apparently attracted by Andre's ear-popping screams. They eventually let both of the men go. You have to understand, in our city and neighborhood, it takes the cops at least 30 minutes to arrive, and nobody really trusted the police. My brothers also feared that they might call someone up to come and get them. This entire live-action movie was done with me getting the arse-whipping of my life from my parents, my brothers getting commended, Andre getting psychological treatment, and Ron getting a pizza, right after he left us with our hooker-calling consequences. Good man. Oh, and Eli got a cool cast on his arm as well, which he broke as he fell down the cliff in an attempt to run away from our kidnappers. We later drew dicks on it, like real friends. We never actually found out who those men were. Our parents forced us to get that business card and give it to the police, but the police never called us back. Don't even know if they investigated it. Our friendship slowly died as Andre, Ron, and Eli succumbed to our neighborhood's nature and became small-time drug dealers and started hanging out with questionable characters. So, moral of the story? Don't ever go looking for hookers on shady business cards, not even to prank them. Oh, also, don't skip school. I'm a firefighter and EMT, so it's pretty normal to find a dead body. But one will always stay with me. There was this middle-aged guy who lived in his van out in a parking lot, somewhat out of town. He never bothered anybody, so the police just let him stay there. It was around the middle of July in Arizona, so about 105 to 110 degrees, and we got a call to go and check on him. Nobody had seen him for a while, and somebody had complained about a foul-smelling odor coming from his van. We all knew what we were going to find, but nothing could prepare us for what we actually came across. I opened the back door to his van, and a cloud of flies flew out so thick you couldn't see through it. I was immediately punched in the face by the stench of death, and when the flies cleared out, we finally got to look at what was there. The guy had been dead for at least 2 weeks, and his cats had survived by eating the fleshier parts of his body. I've seen my fair share of corpses, but something about a guy who's been in a van for 2 weeks in the Arizonan heat, with cats eating his body, just stays with you. Hi guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Well, hey guys, Lazy here. Well, that upcoming video's taking a little longer than I planned to make, so I figured it would be nice to put out a compilation of my favourite stories from the past few months, since I can piece these things together in a flash. And hey, maybe there's a few you missed. I guess this one's more for the people who fall asleep listening to the stories, or just like to relax with them on. Anyway, enough blabbering. Enjoy the video, and remember, the best things happen in the dark. Many years ago now, I lived in Florida with my then fiancée, Claire. She was my high school sweetheart and the love of my life. A small, petite little thing who couldn't scare a mouse even if she wanted to. Not that she would. She's got a heart of gold. Money was tight for us back then, and I worked night shifts at a gas station to help ease our financial woes. It goes without saying that I hated the hours, but it paid decently, and at a time when I'd have sold my left nut to eat a nice meal at a restaurant, rather than have another microwave meal, who was I to complain? It was while working there that I met Angela, a customer who I became friendly with over the course of a couple of weeks. She was a decently attractive girl, a few years my senior and a bit overweight, but she appeared to be a normal, funny person. That's the thing with people who plan on screwing up your life. They don't come to you as a mindless crazy. Those people you know not to interact with. But because of how ordinary Angela appeared to be, I started chatting with her every time she came into the store. In hindsight, it was a little strange that this woman would come to the store every night and spend a good long while just chatting with me. Most times not even buying anything. But the night shifts were dull, and I guess I welcomed the company. She had always come in at those weird hours because of her insomnia. She refused to take sleeping pills or anything like that because she hated the idea of taking drugs. Funny. The more and more she came into the store, the more I started to realize that she probably wasn't taking some other types of drugs that she should be. After a while, cracks started to appear. I don't know whether she felt comfortable enough around me to let out her real self, or she just couldn't contain that level of crazy any longer. It was the way she acted, and the strange things she said. Like how she had bet that my blood smelled really nice, like a perfume. She had dropped these lines into casual conversation. At some point, I must have made it obvious that I wasn't single, because she asked me what my girl's name was. I didn't want to give her her real name, so I just made one up on the spot. Phoebe. I guess I'd been watching Friends that week. It became apparent that Angela was obsessed with me. That's not my ego talking. She literally confessed that she was in love with me and wanted to have my babies. Sorry. I just told you about my fiancé. Her face didn't change, like that wasn't even an issue. So, no can do. How serious can it be? I don't even see an engagement ring, she replied. Well, money's tight. We haven't even set a date for the wedding yet, so... Without hesitation, she blurts out, I'll give you $200 to fuck me. Double if you get me pregnant. Anything you want if you dump your whore of a fiancé. Shell-shocked, I muttered, Get out, please. With that, she left the store. She didn't come in the following night, or the night after that. Well, I guess she got the message, I thought to myself. A couple more days pass, and it's a Saturday afternoon. I'd been out by myself walking our dog, Albert, and was on my way back home, since my parents were coming over to our place for a late lunch. When I arrive back home, Claire fills me in on something. Apparently, some woman had come to the door and was asking to talk to me. Said that she was one of my co-workers. She also greeted my fiancée as Phoebe. Shit, Angela's found where I live. I explained to Claire who this nutjob was, and that she was obsessed with me. Thankfully, she knew me well enough to know that I wasn't having an affair behind her back. Being the trusting person she was, Claire invited Angela in, telling her I'd be back soon. She followed her inside to wait for me. Thankfully, my parents and a couple of family friends were already there. At one point, whilst waiting for me to get back, Claire went to use the bathroom. When she came back down, Angela had gone. Just walked out without saying a word, according to the others. I hated the fact that Angela knew where I lived, and that she'd been stalking me. I considered calling the police, but stupidly, I decided to think it over instead. The rest of the afternoon was uneventful, and went by far too quickly. My shift was starting soon, and I was dreading the inevitable return of Angela, back with a vengeance. Claire was already in bed when it came time for me to leave. Just as I was getting ready to head out, I noticed Albert was sniffing at one of the small closet doors, scratching at it and whimpering. Great, we've got rats, I assumed. Come on, Albert, let's take a look then. I opened the closet, and there was Angela, crouched down in the small space under the stairs. Her eyes were wild. One of her hands was clasped over her mouth to hush her breathing. In the other, she held a small knife. You bet your ass that I didn't hesitate to call the police now. Thankfully, she dropped the knife pretty much instantly, and didn't put up much resistance, just bad-mouthing my fiancée, calling her an ugly whore, and begging me to give her a shot instead, as if saying all this would make the situation better for her in some way. The cops arrived, and took her away with little trouble, Claire in tears at the whole situation, me shaking due to a mixture of rage, fear, and confusion. Angela admitted to everything. According to her confession, she knew that I was out of the house when she knocked on the door. That was her plan all along. She hadn't come to talk to me. She came to murder my fiancé. She had brought that concealed knife with her to do so. In her mind, with Claire out of the picture, I'd be all hers, and we'd run away together. What she didn't know was that my parents and our family friends were there too. She followed me in her car to make sure I'd be gone long enough, during which time our guests arrived. When she saw them inside, she knew that she'd have to wait. When Claire went to the bathroom, Angela left the room with my parents in. But she didn't walk out the front door as everyone assumed. Instead, she quietly stowed herself away in that small closet, waiting for the others to leave. She knew my shifts like the back of her hand, so when I returned to the house, she figured she'd wait until I went to work. That way the house would be nice and empty, and at that point she'd be able to murder my fiancé. Along with the blade, she had brought a whole bunch of pictures of me, taken without my knowledge. They were of me inside the store, taken from outside, of me in the car, of me just walking around town. This woman had literally been chronicling my everyday life since I met her. Why she brought the photos along with her, I have no idea. It's extremely creepy to think that she was in that house with us the entire day, especially when you consider what she was planning. We moved out of state not long after this, not because we thought Angela might escape and come after us again, but because Claire didn't feel at home in that house anymore, as if it was tainted by Angela's actions. As I said, this all took place many years ago, and I can now happily say that Claire and I did eventually get married. We now have 2 beautiful children, and the whole Angela incident is far behind us. Though I still lay awake at night sometimes, thinking about how everything you hold dear in this world can be taken away from you by some lunatic. It's only pure dumb luck that I noticed Albert's whining, and just before I left as well. What would have happened had I actually left for work doesn't bear thinking about. I took in a puppy a few months ago. Her original owners weren't able to bond with her, said she was unresponsive and disobedient, and didn't have the look they wanted. I've got no idea what they were talking about. She's the best behaved dog I've ever known, and she's downright adorable, so I'm used to people stopping me in the street so they can pet her. Usually, people will ask before they touch her, or at the very least, they'll say something like, "Oh my god, look at that dog," to let you know they're obviously gonna come over and say hi to her. I'm pretty much fine with that. What I'm not fine with is what happened on one of my earlier walks with her. I live in a tiny seaside town, one of those places where the location is beautiful but the locals are racist, and I kind of take my dog on a tour of all the areas closest to the sea when I walk her. We'll walk along the beach, down the promenade, around the miniature lakes, and then home. Probably not smart to stick to the same route every day, but I've switched things up since then. Anyway, we were at the final stage of our walk, making a couple of laps around the secluded lakes, when we walked past a man. Now, a lot of old men gather there on a regular basis. I didn't think much of one dude sitting on a bench by the water. I told myself he was staring because my dog was cute. I just passed him by. Then, from behind me, I hear him say, "Sit." And my dog, who is much more obedient than her previous owners led on, sits down and looks up at me, all happy and expecting a treat. I frown back at the guy, see that he's still on the bench, and quickly encourage my puppy to start walking again. We haven't even got 5 feet further down the path before the guy says, "Sit," and my dog does. I turn around again, already glaring, and see that the man is now on his feet. I tell my dog to keep walking and pick up my pace, trying to get over to the path that leads up to the main street, away from this empty place. We're still nowhere near the path when the man yells, "Sit," and again my dog does. She's starting to look confused, but I'm pretty much terrified. He's coming over to us, and he's catching up fairly quickly. He's close enough that even without my glasses on, I can tell that he's grinning. At that point, I'd had enough. I forget about getting to the path, just scooped up my dog off the ground, ran straight up the hill to the side of us, and climbed over the little fence that separates the lakes from the street. The man didn't follow, but stayed at the bottom of the hill, looking up at us, not smiling anymore. I'd never seen him before, and haven't seen him since, and I hope it stays that way. I don't know exactly what his intentions were, but it seemed to me like he was using my dog's obedience to slow me down, to keep me from getting away from him. So I doubt they were good. Glad I didn't stick around to find out. This is a story told to me by my friend, and he maintains that it's completely true. He knew one of the people involved. I've heard of things like this happening before, and it's as interesting as it is disturbing to think about. It might start to sound a bit crazy, but stick with it. This story's about a 28-year-old guy called Kevin, as well as Kevin's girlfriend, another man named Bruce, and his girlfriend too. It was a weekend night in the midst of summer, and the two couples had been on a trip to the beach. Kevin had his own motorbike, and the rest were in a car being driven by Bruce. It was getting late, and there were no other cars in sight, so Bruce challenges Kevin to a race back home. Stupid? Sure, but there wasn't far to go, and the roads seemed deserted. Bruce and Kevin's apartments were in the same building. In fact, that was how they originally met, and they became close quickly. Not a guy to turn down a challenge, the engine roars, and Kevin's bike starts to accelerate. The first to arrive back was the car. At this point, it was around midnight. Elated, Bruce and his girlfriend jump out of the car and head right back to their room. But Kevin's girlfriend was worried. She knew that Kevin was a whiz on his bike. He should have arrived back way before them. She called him a couple of times, but assuming he was busy driving, she left a voicemail and headed upstairs. A few hours later, there was a fierce knocking on the door. Bruce and his girlfriend were standing outside with forlorn faces. Bruce opens up his mouth to speak, but the words won't come out. Eventually, it was his girlfriend who spoke up. Kevin got into an accident on the way back. He's dead. Kevin had approached a sharp bend in the road too quickly, and the rest goes without saying. Like I said, she was worried before, and the prospect had occurred to her, but she had just willed herself into believing that couldn't be the case. But it was. She just fell to the floor in tears. They tried to console her as best as they could, but that was when Bruce said something very strange. Listen, don't freak out, but I think the cops may have made a mistake. See, Kevin came by our room. The pair were shivering, despite the hot summer air. Kevin's mum had just called us up and told us what happened. I told her we'd break the news to you. When I hung up, we heard a knocking at the door. We asked who it was, and it was Kevin. We thought he was playing some kind of sick joke on us at first, but his mum wouldn't have lied about something like that. We were scared, so we didn't open the door. Eventually, we heard footsteps, and he went away. She, of course, couldn't believe what they had told her, but they were being deadly serious. They both seemed convinced that Kevin's ghost had come to say goodbye or something. Even if they really believe that to be the case, it still seems like a pretty insensitive thing to say to someone who's just lost their boyfriend. But what's weirder is that before they left, they said that if Kevin came knocking on her door, she mustn't open it, no matter what, like a warning. Needless to say, this whole ordeal freaked her the hell out. In shock, she spent the whole next day locked in her room, mourning the death of Kevin. Eventually, she managed to cry herself to sleep. That night, she woke up to the sound of knocking. Thinking that her mind was playing tricks on her, she pulled the bedsheets over herself and desperately tried to fall back into sleep. The knocking continued, and this time, whoever was knocking spoke. "Hey, it's me. Open the door." It was unmistakably Kevin's voice. Crazy, right? Well, that's the thing. Though it obviously made no logical sense, the whole scenario somehow felt completely natural to her. She approached the door carefully, compelled to answer his call. The closer she got to the door, the more she felt Kevin's presence. "Please, open the door." She felt tears brimming up as she reached for the handle. But this was nuts. After all, he was dead. She desperately tried to communicate with Kevin, or whoever or whatever was behind the door. "You're already dead," she shouted. The knocking got louder. "You're already dead, Kevin." But the knocking continued, and the shouting just became louder and louder. She couldn't help but cry even more. The thought that Kevin may somehow still be suffering, or desperate to say goodbye, was more than she could bear. That was it. She flung open the door and shouted for him at the top of her voice. And then she woke up. She had been in a coma. When she came to, she found herself in a brightly lit hospital room. Next to her bed sat Kevin, who was crying in relief. She felt weak and couldn't comprehend what was happening. Kevin elaborated. In reality, he had arrived back at the apartment before the others, but became worried when they seemingly took forever to catch up. He went back down the same route, only to find Bruce's car obliterated just after a sharp bend. Both Bruce and his girlfriend were literally in pieces, but she somehow survived. She was the only one in the back seat. Maybe this was all just an extremely vivid and involved dream that she was having whilst in the coma. She maintains that it was undeniably more real than that she and the others were someplace else, and that Kevin hadn't come to say goodbye, but to try and bring them back. However you choose to rationalize this, she remains convinced that if she had listened to Bruce's advice and not opened the door, she wouldn't have woken up. This took place a few years ago, while I was living with my parents. It's the early hours of the morning, around 2 AM. I step outside for a cigarette, and since my mum absolutely hates the things, I had to sneak out back by the woods. As I'm standing there, smoking, I notice a figure standing at the edge of the forest. It's my neighbour, Sean. What's he doing out here at this hour? He's looking right at me. I wave at him, and he just stands there, motionless. All of a sudden, it's hard to breathe. The air seems thick, and has a metallic smell to it, the same way that pennies taste. This was a really eerie situation, but I kick myself for being such a scaredy cat, and take another drag on my cigarette. As I do, the smoke gets in my eyes, and those of you who've had this happen will know that it stings like a bitch. I'm forced to close my eyes and rub them for what couldn't have been more than a few seconds. I open my eyes, and Sean is standing closer to me. Like in the brief moment that my eyes were shut, he'd walked from the edge of the woods towards me, and then stopped and stood motionless again. What the hell's he doing in the forest anyway? What is this? He waves at me, but it's like he's jerking his arm rather than moving it fluidly, like he's not sure what he's doing with it. I don't take my eyes off him as I put out my cigarette and back up into the house. His eyes are fixated on me the entire way. I shut the door and quickly move to the window to peek out and see what he's up to. He's right there, maybe 10 or 15 yards away from the house now, still staring right at me. I lock the door. Hell, I start locking every damn door in the house. When I'm finished, I go to check the basement door. He's right there, standing at the window, looking in and staring at me still. He does that jerking wave. Now that he's up close, I could see that something was wrong with him. It was Sean, but at the same time, it wasn't. Like someone had copy and pasted him into reality, but didn't make a perfect match. The instant I saw his face up close, his jaw drooping open, that uncanny valley sensation consumed me. I let forth a scream that would wake the dead, and sprinted upstairs, where I encounter my stepdad, who asks me what the fuck's going on. I tell him there's someone outside, and he grabs his gun and goes to check. No one's there. The next day, I ask Sean about it. He doesn't know what I'm talking about. At the time, I'd never heard of skinwalkers, but after reading about them, I'm almost 100% sure that this was one of them. This is a story from roughly 5 years ago. You might think I sound like a bit of a dick at certain points, but I think it's important that I don't sugarcoat things and just be honest. If nothing else, I hope you can respect that. I was 17 and still in high school at the time. At the start of the year, a girl joined our class from a different school. Considering our age, and how difficult it is to make friends halfway through high school, I figured that she must have been forced to move because of her dad's job or something. This girl was good looking and clever, like really smart, and it wasn't long before she became popular, particularly with the guys. I don't dare give her actual name, in case this story ever finds its way to her. Let's just call her Rin. Honestly, I didn't pay much attention to Rin at first. I had my own group of friends, and although I could tell she was pretty, she wasn't really my type. I had nothing to gain from talking to her. I was also pretty clever myself. It's not like I was the smartest guy in our class, but I was clever enough to get into a relatively good college without much effort. As such, my immediate concern during that high school year was securing myself a girlfriend. My first girlfriend that year was the team captain of the girls' basketball team. It took a few days, but I diligently waited for an opportunity when we were both alone on the court. Then I made my move. I went in to kiss her, and when she didn't push me back or pull away herself, I sealed the deal. But about a month after we started dating, she suddenly broke up with me. I thought we'd had a great time together. Then again, it's not uncommon for high school love affairs to be short and sweet. I asked her why she broke up with me, but she just kept on saying she didn't want to see me anymore, and I didn't get a reason out of her. It was a bit of a blow, but I recovered after a few days, and I started chasing after another girl. What really troubled me, though, was what happened afterwards. I dated 3 more girls, but one after another, they'd say they wanted to break up. I didn't think I was the nicest of guys, but I certainly wasn't that bad. Either way, all 3 of them broke up with me after less than a week of going out. Let me tell you, when that shit happens to you, you can't help but feel slightly depressed. If they had just rejected me when I asked them out, that would have been fine. But the fact they broke up with me after going out for such a short time implied I had some severe defect I wasn't aware of. My confidence was already in tatters by the midpoint of the first semester. That was the state I was in when Rin asked me out. Like I said, she wasn't my type, but I was so desperate I immediately accepted. I heard later from my friend who was with me at the time that when I said okay, Rin had smiled in a really crooked way. I still think back to it now. If only I hadn't accepted. Roughly twice a week, we'd visit each other's house and have sex. We ended up doing it in Rin's house more often, as her parents were divorced, and her rich dad had bought her her own place. Considering what we got up to, to. I'd actually class our relationship as friends with benefits rather than a couple. To be fair, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't enjoying the situation. Most guys dream about having a sex buddy. Then again, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were plenty of other guys who were after Rin, and when they found out I was dating her, they started giving me a hard time. I think it also had something to do with the fact that I was dating her after splitting up with so many others before. I think they thought I was just having sex with them one by one, moving on from one to the next. Strange thing was, a few weeks after they started giving me grief, I got an apology from them. At first, I thought they were gonna push me around a bit, but then I realized they looked kind of scared. Apparently, they had started receiving a ton of death threats via emails and letters ever since they'd been giving me trouble. They seemed to think I was the culprit behind it. When I told them it wasn't me, they just apologized again and walked away. This was fine in itself, but these death threats had been sent to other people in our class too. There was this girl I was friendly with, due to us both being on the school council. I'd heard from her that she had been receiving the threatening emails too, and it was becoming a problem. She tried getting the police involved, but as far as the police were concerned, death threats by email happened all the time, and unless something happened physically, they wouldn't be able to do anything. I was an idiot. I should have realized at this point that something was wrong. One day, as usual, I'd stayed around Rin's house. We had finished up our homework and fell asleep together. For whatever reason, I started to feel particularly lightheaded that night, and passed out with minimal difficulty. I woke up in the middle of the night, and realized I couldn't move my arms or legs. I tried and tried again in the dark room, but my limbs wouldn't budge. I assumed I was still dreaming. But as my hazy, sleep-clogged mind became clear, I realized that the bed had been covered round and round in tape, with me still on it. A blue light suddenly flickered to my right, along with a sharp zapping sound. As I looked to the source of the sound, again the blue light flashed, illuminating Rin's face. She was sitting on a chair next to the bed with a stern expression. She was holding a stun gun. At first, I thought she was just playing a joke on me, but as she pressed the stun gun against my neck, I knew I was fucked. I panicked and struggled desperately to break free of the bonds, but to no avail. There was just too much damn tape tying me down. As I squirmed, Rin jumped on top of me and cried out hysterically.
"You're mine! No one else is allowed to touch you! I'm not giving you to anybody! Not to her, or her, or her!"
With that, she started to repeat all of the names of the girls I'd dated, or was even just friends with.
"Slut! Slut! Slut!"
Every time she shouted slut, she brought down the stun gun on my chest, blue light flaring again and again. I blacked out for a moment. As I came to, hazy and hoping this had all been a delusion, the torture continued.
Are you awake? Why is it that you cheat on me?
Wait, what?
It's her, isn't it? The girl in 2C?
The name of the girl that Rin mentioned was indeed a girl I fancied. As I said before, I didn't feel anything special towards Rin. She'd asked me out, and I only agreed on a whim. I considered her only as a sex friend, so it was natural that there was someone else I had the hots for. I had only told a few of my closest friends about my feelings towards that girl, but somehow Rin had gotten word of it. With the weapon in one hand, she questioned me again.
You like her, don't you?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Don't pretend.
I forgot to mention, but all through the conversation she had been smiling. There seemed to be no emotion behind the clown mask she wore.
Come on, tell me. You like her, right?
I was crying at this point, my body involuntarily twitching, the room spinning slightly. What? No, I don't even know that girl.
You're lying again. I heard from Kay that you like her.
Kay, the friend she mentioned, was someone that I had known since I started high school. He was one of my closest friends.
How much do you like her?
I didn't say a word, and tried to look away from her face.
I'm asking you a question.
I remained silent.
I'm asking you a fucking question!
This continued for what I think was around 2 hours, but I'm not sure. It felt like time in that room passed 10 times slower. Please, just stop. I'm sorry. Rin looked me in the eyes.
If you tell me the truth, if you tell me that you love her, I'll let you go.
I like her. As soon as I said it, she forced the stun gun down on me. The pain was so intense. It was something humans aren't meant to endure. As she held her finger down on the switch, my eyes filled with white light. Then everything went black. I woke up to find myself still in Rin's room, no longer bound to the bed. As I frantically looked around for Rin, I noticed that the room wasn't any different to how it usually looked. There was no evidence of there ever being tape on the bed, and more importantly, no stun gun. The whole thing seemed like a bad dream, despite the fact I knew it wasn't. I lay in bed, too scared to move. The door swung open violently. Instinctively, I pulled the bedsheets over me and pretended I was still asleep. Rin entered the room.
Are you still asleep?
She jumped onto the bed and laid next to me, taking out her phone and holding it very close to my face. Squinting my eyes open ever so tightly, I just about made out what was on her phone. It was the number of the girl from Class 2C, along with a long text, consisting of all of the embarrassing secrets I had only ever told my closest of friends. It also revealed details of all of the sexual acts that Rin and I had ever performed.
I'm gonna send this to her. What do you think?
I wanted to punch her, but resisting the urge, I continued my pretense and lay still.
I guess there's no way you can answer me if you're asleep.
The way she innocently laughed, despite everything that had happened, was truly terrifying. I heard a beep.
Oh no, I've sent it.
At that point, I wasn't sure I'd be able to leave the house alive without a fight. I gave it a few more minutes, and then pretended to wake up.
Oh, you're awake.
I didn't reply.
I don't think I need to tell you what I'd do if you talk about what happened tonight, right?
Again, I didn't reply.
I wonder, what'll happen to her if you talk?
I shivered. I won't tell anybody. She laughed again.
I'm not actually gonna hurt a girl, silly.
Rin didn't let me leave the house until the next morning when school started. I sat in class in a dazed state, unable to pay attention to the teacher. The way I saw it, I had 3 options. One was to go on with my life as if nothing had happened. I just had to make sure not to talk to any more girls while at school. The second was to go to the police. This would be best, but as far as I could tell, Rin had been very clever and left no evidence in the room. Most likely, she would have hidden the stun gun, and the device hadn't left any marks on my body. Sadly, the police were far more likely to believe her story over mine. The last option was to confront Rin, or get rid of her. But that was out of the question, of course, as much as I would have liked to at that point. By the end of the day, I decided I should contact the police. Even if they couldn't arrest her, at least it would mean she wouldn't be able to do anything rash for the time being. But, of course, contacting the police wouldn't be easy, since Rin was watching me almost all of the time. If one of Rin's oblivious underlings told her that they'd seen me call someone, I could be in some real danger. It had also become clear during yesterday's events that that psycho had collected incriminating evidence on some of my friends. About what specifically, I don't know, but she used it to blackmail them. That explains why they told her who I was actually interested in. Rin was lying in wait for me just outside the main school entrance. As I saw her wave to me, I thought I was going to throw up. Next to her was my female friend from school council, the one who tried to contact the police about the anonymous threats. She lived in the same direction as Rin, who had organised that the three of us walk home together. Before we set off, Rin took a moment to subtly show me the contents of her bag. Inside was a knife. As we walked back, I seriously started considering option 3. If I was fast enough, I might be able to knock her out before she had a chance to go for the knife. She mumbled under her breath at random intervals.
I can slit her throat whenever I want to.
As soon as we were in a deserted spot, Rin took out the knife. The girl with us just stared, completely bewildered. Ignoring the girl, Rin looked at me straight in the eyes.
Do you love me? Or do you love her?
The girl let out a nervous giggle as if this was a joke, but as soon as she noticed I wasn't smiling, she too began to look worried. I realized at this point what I had to do. There was no way I could reason with Rin. When I didn't answer, she opened up her bag to take out her stun gun. Thinking that this was my only chance, I threw my bag at her with all my strength. Even if she was fucking nuts, she was still a girl, and the force of the bag sent her tumbling to the ground. I immediately grabbed the other girl's hand and ran. Even as we distanced ourselves, we could still hear Rin's demented screams. With both of our statements, Rin was taken into custody. She wasn't sent to prison. As suspected, she had been clever and had immediately disposed of the knife and the stun gun before the police came to her house. But, thankfully, since she had blackmailed so many other students, there was enough evidence to get her expelled from the school. Throughout the police investigation, I also discovered why those girls kept dumping me. Rin had been sending them death threats too. I was her target from the beginning. The way I look at all of this is that it was karma for me being such a cocky little shit during high school. Sadly, this story doesn't end on a happy note, but at least I can say that nobody got killed. And ever since, I haven't seen or heard from Rin. I really hope it stays that way. I am a 19-year-old female living in rural England. It's pretty much the middle of nowhere. Pokemon Go had just gone live here, and being a total freak for the series, I had to check it out immediately. I've been loving it so far. One feature in the game is that you can use an item called Incense to attract more Pokemon. I found out fairly quickly that incense works a lot better on the move. If I stayed around my house while using it, I'd only ever attract the usual Pidgeys and Weedles. But if I used it whilst out jogging, I'd often come across more interesting and varied finds. Since it lasts for 30 minutes after being activated, I'd been using the incense around 10 minutes into my jog, which was when I'd reach these woods which I run through. It's midday, so I'm not too worried as I'm making my way through the heart of the woods by myself, stopping sporadically to catch abras and slowpokes and whatnot. This is a hotspot for Pokemon, so my attention is fixed to the screen of my phone, my headphones blocking out all noise around me. That's why I didn't hear him approach. I was interrupted by a tap on my shoulder, which nearly gave me a heart attack. I whip out my earphones and spin to face whoever was there. It's some creepy, sweaty man in his mid-30s, with a scruffy beard and wild hair. He was dressed in that army man, cheap camo jacket and trouser getup, almost like he was trying to blend into the surroundings. Instinctively, I freeze up. My mind goes blank, and all I can do is stare back at him. He doesn't say anything at first, his face doing all the talking. The intensity of his gaze was haunting. His eyes opened so wide, it was almost like he didn't have eyelids. Then, completely emotionless, in an almost robotic fashion, he says, "Give me a reason not to kill you." I can barely react. All I want to do is sprint the hell away, but my legs are set to hibernate mode. I can't even respond verbally to him. "No one would ever know it was me," he says, but not like it was directed at me, but to himself, like he was really contemplating it or convincing himself. Adrenaline was starting to take effect now, and I was pretty much ready to kick this guy in the sweet spot and make my escape. But after the most uncomfortable silence in existence, he turned around and calmly walked back through the thicket. I tear up with fear as this guy disappears out of sight, and then sprinted home as fast as my legs could propel me. Thankfully, he didn't follow. What worries me is that this is like future serial killer type of behavior. It felt like I was some sort of test run or something, like he was gauging my reaction. Trust me when I say that these woods are literally in the middle of nowhere, secluded to the point where I don't think I've ever seen another soul in there before this encounter. I haven't been out jogging since this happened, but when I do, I'll definitely be changing my route. This whole thing wasn't the game's fault, and I could have run into this weirdo anywhere, but it does go to show that you should always pay attention to your surroundings when playing the game. It's easy to let your guard down when your face is immersed in your smartphone and your headphones are in. I was on a 41-foot sailboat in the middle of Chesapeake Bay with about 7 other men doing a shakedown test cruise. We planned to be out there for about 12 hours. It was the mid-1980s, not as reliable weather prediction resources. We get caught in a tropical storm, winds gusting into the 50 miles an hour range. We had just barely rigged storm hawsers and storm sails, because the one fellow on board who was the best sailor sensed that the storm was almost on us, otherwise we would have died. During the storm itself, I expected to die at any time. In fact, we made a security call on the radio. If you've spent time at sea, you'll know what I'm talking about. For what seemed like 15 minutes, we were in a maelstrom, no visibility. But then, thankfully, it passed, and we would live. This was at about 3 PM, and although there was cloud cover of course, the ambient light was such that you could see for 2 miles in any given direction. If you're familiar with the sea, you know that such storms, particularly in shallower depths near land masses, dredge up a lot of things from the sea floor. We're all on deck, working lines and checking damage, and the bay around us is choppy and churning and foaming. Old-timey sailors often use the saying, "the sea is confused." I look about 15 feet off the starboard side, and something swims to the surface, breaks the surface, looks at us, and then submerges again. It was like a thin man with humanoid shape, arms articulated like a man, a human head, but its skin was covered in scales like a snake. It looked at us, blinked its weird, heavy-lidded eyes, and then dove back under. So, maybe you need to know a few things about me at that moment. No drugs, no alcohol, no injuries. I was elated because I was glad to be alive, but my senses in that situation were sharpened, not dulled. I had, at the time, about 6 years' experience on ships and fishing boats, and had seen squid, octopi, flying fish, sharks, skates, everything, all around the world. I wasn't the type of guy to see a patch of seaweed and call it a sea monster. I made an instant decision that I wasn't going to say anything. What could I say? I just saw a strange creature, take my word for it? The men on this boat were all mechanics and engineers and professionals. Why get a reputation as a flake? At the time, it was important for each of us to get D-Skipper or OOD qualifications, and saying something like that would be frowned upon. And as I stood there in my life vest, soaking wet, hooked onto the steel lifeline, glad just to be alive, one of the other sailors, a USN captain with over 30 years' experience in the surface navy, piped up and said, "I just saw a brown thing pop up on the surface. It looked like a lizard man with a scaly face. It blinked at us with these big eyes and then went back under." "Yeah, I saw it too," I said. No one else said that they had seen it. We sailed back to the pier later that day and didn't speak of it again. When my grandfather was younger, he became the principal of an elementary school. He was in his late 20s or early 30s at the time, and despite being young, he was a born leader. He was a great principal and everyone loved him. I can attest to that, as I attended multiple award ceremonies for him, and the respect and admiration that he received was crazy. There was a young boy at the school who was having behavioral issues in class, and my grandfather saw that the kid didn't have a lot of parental support. So he called in his father and had a talk with him about spending more time with his son, and just a general parenting session. It turned out that all the boy needed was his dad's attention, and after a few weeks, he was a happy, model student. Whenever my grandfather would leave school late, he would see that the dad was playing basketball with his son after he had gotten home from work. It was one of those moments that he took pride in, being able to make a difference in people's lives. However, not everything had such an easy solution, and my grandfather found himself having to deal with an employee, Stanley the janitor, who was showing up to work drunk. Stanley was an alcoholic with a mean streak, and my grandfather tried on multiple occasions to deal with his behavior. Finally, one day, Stanley showed up so drunk that my grandfather sent him home and called up the superintendent to let him know that he was going to fire him the next day after he had sobered up. My grandfather then warned the superintendent to let him deal with it when Stanley was sober, because Stanley was not a stable person. As it goes in these kind of stories, the superintendent was furious and decided that he was going to fire Stanley himself. No one called my grandfather to let him know either, so he was completely in the dark and thought he would be able to deal with it in the morning. When the superintendent called him up, Stanley was furious and went to the school that evening. He searched all of the offices, My grandpa
id Software are often credited for pioneering rapidly advancing graphical technology, but they were just as proficient in the world of audio, going from Doom's iconic but admittedly dated effects to Quake's haunting soundscape within the span of just 3 years. The advent of the CD-ROM allowed games to take further advantage of this, whether it